Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Kendra Kelling. I'm the Director of Programming with Lakeshore Natural Resource Partnership, and we are honored to be hosting the Lake Michigan Regional Sub-Event of Wisconsin Water Week. Today's presentation will explore the Coastal Resource Hub, a dynamic, interactive online tool developed by the Lake Michigan stakeholders to unite education campaigns along Wisconsin's Lake Michigan coast. First, Reid, owner of Water 365, will provide an overview of Lake Michigan stakeholders. Next, Dr. Deidre Peroff, social science outreach specialist with Wisconsin Sea Grant, will explain the process that informed the development of this tool. Amy Lentz, graduate student of the UW-Milwaukee School of Freshwater Science, will then walk us through the Coastal Resource Hub and show us how it works. We will save a few minutes for Q&A at the end. Please type your questions into the Q&A section and upvote questions you would like answered. Linda, take it away.
Thank you, Kendra. As Kendra said, my name is Linda Reid, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Lake Michigan stakeholders. And my job here is to tell you just a little bit about the organization. Deidre, can you advance the slide? So our tagline is Wisconsin's Voice for Lake Michigan. And while we realize that there are many voices that should be included, our organization's mission is to raise all those voices up and allow folks who are interested in the health of the lake and the rivers and streams and land that are coastal to the lake to have a voice. And I'll share our mission and vision next. So our mission is to inspire and engage a community of stewards to champion the health and viability of the Lake Michigan basin. Our vision, what we'd like to see, is that Lake Michigan and the natural and cultural resources of the basin are environmentally resilient, economically viable, and not just for us, but for present and future generations. The group is made up of over 200 diverse members, including folks that align with environmental groups, the government, whether that's a municipality or statewide government, the private sector. For example, I represent a business, and just general public, members of the public who are interested in the health and the welfare of the Great Lakes and the communities along the coastline. We're organized around a steering committee that is representative of the members of the group. And that right now is a group of 14 folks. We meet regularly to discuss issues and to put on events. I strongly encourage you to check out Lake Michigan stakeholders website. And if you're interested in joining us, either as a member or possibly interested in joining this steering committee, we'd be really excited to hear from you. Next slide, please. Thanks. So what's the Coastal Resource Hub? Basically, as Kendra mentioned, it's a dynamic strategy to collect, enhance, and inspire the development of Lake Michigan education. It's a way for us to share what is happening with the lake and how we can all work together to make it healthier. There's quite a bit of beautiful and easily accessible content available on the site. And the goal is that we all speak sort of the same message, so people understand the information that we're trying to communicate from Kenosha up to Door counties. Regardless of where you live, we want to make sure that people have the same understanding about the information that we're trying to present. And it's designed to be used by folks who do education about stormwater issues and Great Lakes issues. So teachers, municipalities, any kind of environmental groups that wish to share information about water quality as it relates to the Great Lakes Basin, that's who this information is for. We had quite a few partners, quite a few partners who were involved in developing the resource hub. Funding from a number of groups. Sweetwater and the Lakeshore Natural Resource Partnership have really put in a lot of hours building the website through which you can receive all the information. So many thanks to our sponsors listed here. And I'm going to turn it over to Deidre at this point from Sea Grant to talk about kind of the process of development. How did we get from an idea to a website to today?
Thanks, Linda. Sorry, when I click, there's a little lag on it. Oh, okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit. So yeah, my name is Deidre Peroff. I'm a social scientist with Wisconsin Sea Grant, based in Milwaukee. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the thought process that went into this whole project, because it's been something that we've been working on for several years now. And one of the things that really helped kick off the design and help us get a lot of feedback about what the Coastal Resource Hub would look like is an initial survey that we did in 2017. So this was called the Wisconsin Coastal Collaboration Survey. And this was put together with help from Sweetwater and some members of the LMS steering committee. And basically we sent out, we developed a list of about 50 organizations that we knew worked on stormwater outreach and asked them to respond to this survey. So 31 organizations responded. About 86% participated in public education and outreach programs designed to increase awareness of urban and rural stormwater impacts. So basically this was something that people were really interested in. It's something they were always already doing. And we wanted to see what some of the strengths were in their programming and what some of the challenges were. Okay, so out of the survey that we did, the target audience that people were trying to reach is kind of displayed here. So mostly people were looking to reach out to household and residential audiences, but it was really across the board. There was also construction and contractors, private businesses, like lawn care, snow removal, restaurants, public organizations, farmers and ag suppliers, and schools. And they also tried to reach out to some volunteers that people had written in. So we asked them also about their outlets used for message distribution. So we wanted to figure out how people were communicating with people and what was most effective. So these are some of the things that people listed as well. It seems like mostly, this was actually pretty surprising. People were hosting outreach and community events, and that was pretty successful in talking about stormwater outreach. This is pre-COVID, I should probably tell you. There's not as many outreach events lately, obviously. A lot of people were communicating through online newsletters and listservs, through social media, doing lots of tabling at community events. And then, let's see, paper mailings were kind of popular. And then probably least popular was door-to-doors. That's not something that people are doing as much lately. Doing some broadcasting on TV or radio. And then some other things that people listed are on the side, such as creating videos, doing school programming, mobile art displays, elected officials, putting that in some of their programming, UW extension, printed media, and then text message alerts, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So this was a kind of write-in qualitative question that we asked people. So what were some of the strengths of your stormwater outreach campaign? And so I just did a little bit of coding to kind of put together what a lot of different people were saying and what was most popular that we could learn from that. And one of the major things was being creative, right? So a lot of organizations had success with doing art demonstrations. For example, Milwaukee Water Commons does a great job with this. They have a water cycle. It is actually kind of a bicycle that they take around with them, and also a sink. And then there's text messaging. I don't know if people have heard of the water drop alert, but if we're at risk of having a stormwater sewage overflow, you'll get a text message on your phone. The Foxwolf Watershed Alliance has a watershed pledge. There's also PSAs and radio announcements, hands-on activities, tours, and then Sweetwater has also done a good job with like adopted drain parties to really get community engagement going. And then likely most of you have heard of Sparkles the Water Dog, it was also a very creative program. And they did PSA announcements through that. Partnerships in a number of ways were also listed as being really, really helpful in doing these stormwater outreach and pollution prevention campaigns. So some of the partnerships listed I have up here, like neighborhood groups, elected officials, working with local schools, nonprofits, university programs, and then this real emphasis, particularly in rural areas. Landowners can be kind of difficult to reach on this topic. So developing these personal relationships and working one-on-one with landowners was effective, and a strategy that was used by several organizations. Working with local sewage districts, the Foxwolf Watershed Alliance was mentioned, as well as Master Naturalists and Sweetwater. And then just two other things that came up were leveraging with existing programs your organization is already doing. So if you don't have time for someone to work full time on this, or you don't have a designated staff person, you know, how can you kind of interweave this outreach into other programs that you're doing? And how can you incorporate it into your mission, vision, and goal statements, and work plans and things like that, so that you make sure that the work gets done? So some of the challenges or barriers, again, this was a qualitative question, so I tried to pull out the key themes. Was prominent among, probably the most common was funding, time, and capacity constraints. So people just said they wanted to do a great job, but they just didn't have the funding or the time, or they needed help figuring out how to get more funding or more staff to work on this. A lot of people mentioned they had a large service area to cover, so that was an issue. They had trouble reaching residents who were unaware of the issues or they weren't concerned. So kind of where is that starting point of communicating about a lot of these issues? And then it's not a particularly gripping topic to talk about pet poop or stormwater pollution. So how, you know, particularly for wildlife organizations and others like that, you know, people are more interested in nature and birds. They're not really interested in these topics. So how do you get them on board? And then it's tough to reach certain groups, particularly teenagers and young adults. How do you get the private sector engaged? And then we did ask about evaluation, which was an issue for a lot of people. It is really difficult to measure behavior change. So even though you have all these great approaches, how can you guarantee that your approach is effective and that it's actually leading to behavior change and reducing pollution? So some of the ways that people mentioned that they tried to do this were through post-field trip surveys for teachers. They did that as an outreach event. Annual metrics reporting, such as that we do this a lot at Sea Grant, performance measures, right? Number of events, presentations, demonstrations, how many participants were there, how many rain barrels did you give away? They also mentioned doing surveys, although doing a household survey was not super common. It was effective, but it was, you know, it's a huge undertaking. Again, back to the funding issue. Google Analytics, that can kind of tell you if you have a website or something, how many people visited that, although that's not super effective in seeing if it was effective in behavior change or not. Mapping tools, so like this watershed pledge, which I think I mentioned earlier that Foxwolf Watershed Alliance does. You can map out who or which organization has done that watershed pledge, and then where there's been adopt a storm drain parties, for example. Personally following up with people, seeing if they read it, if they were inspired by what they read, and then annual reporting required by the state. And then a lot of people said that, or a few of the respondents said that they just don't measure the effectiveness at all. So finally, this was really informative in kind of telling us if our project was going to be useful. The question was, are you interested in helping us develop a collaborative stormwater education and information program for Wisconsin's coastal communities? And so most people were kind of skeptical, wanted more information. A lot of people were on board. They wanted to jump right in and get involved. And then I think 5 people said no, they were not interested. So just briefly, kind of another, I don't know, slide to show this is a really complicated process. It was something that we worked on for a while. So we did this initial survey, but then we had a lot of these kind of questions come up that we were brainstorming about, like how can we create a stormwater pollution prevention campaign that could be useful for water practitioners up and down the coast? How can we make it easily accessible to partners? How can we help water professionals and partners reach target audiences that we've had trouble communicating with in the past? Like we mentioned, maybe teenagers or millennials or landowners kind of in really rural areas. How do we develop an outreach campaign that we can get buy-in from people, something that people will really find useful? And how do we share a more unified message that would be useful for practitioners and more impactful for Wisconsin residents in reducing pollution? So these are some of the questions that we brainstormed. And we did a few things to do that, to tackle these questions. One thing is we hired a communications specialist consultant, and she helped us kind of figure out how to reach these target groups that we were having trouble with. So that was really effective. And she worked directly with the Lake Michigan Stakeholders Group, Victoria Communications, I believe it's called. We also, Kendra and Jake Fincher and I participated in Think Water School, where we dove really deeply into doing a lot of logic modeling around this through systems thinking approach. And so this map is actually one that Amy, who is our intern on the project right now, is going to talk next. But she started to put together a Plectica map, which is this really, really useful tool in kind of mapping out really complex problems like we're talking about today. So we won't go into systems thinking because that would be a lot more time than we have today, but this is just to show you kind of how complicated this whole process has been. And I will turn it over to Amy to tell you more about the Resource Hub specifics and kind of what it looks like now.
All right, great. Thanks, Deidre. So my name is Amy Lentz. I'm a master's student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I'm studying freshwater science and technology. And I was hired by the Lake Michigan stakeholders, specifically, Sweetwater and Wisconsin Sea Grant, to kind of work on turning like Linda and Deidre talked a lot about kind of like the vision and the process and all this background information, and like turning that background information into like a tangible and usable tool. So that's kind of what I'm here to share today is like, okay, we know where everything came from, but what ultimately did we end up creating? And so I'm going to kind of go through the goals that Linda mentioned in a little bit more detail, a little bit more directly, and then kind of answer some questions, like who uses this resource hub? How does it work, right? How do we get this information to us and back out? How is the site organized? Because I hope, if you're attending here today, that you'd be interested after and kind of visiting and exploring the resource hub so you can kind of see how it's organized, like how we kind of put it together. And then ultimately just some like a list of the materials and like kind of the stuff we're looking for sharing, you guys to share with us, and that, you guys will be able to find on the resource hub. So great. So our first goal was to provide quality content. That's the quintessential goal of outreach, right? And like when you look at the survey and you say like, well, you guys everybody wants to create these great outreach programs, but people are limited on time, people are limited on funding. And so how can we make that process easier for everyone? I mean, that was the primary goal. So I have these 3 pictures here are like 3 different examples of things organizations have shared with us. So LNRP, Sweetwater, Neighborhood House, like, these organizations are sharing the content they've created. And I mean, obviously the goal is that it saves other organizations time. So ultimately, you're working, you want to find a quick picture of a rain barrel that is in Wisconsin. And instead of like, sifting through Google and doing all these things, you go to the resource hub, you find it right away. And it's you can trust that it's quality. So we hope that, like, saves time. We also hope, like, as cheesy as this sounds, I think that it like kind of inspires. I know I worked in outreach for a while prior to enrolling in grad school, and I know, like, you always feel this pressure of like, oh, like, should we reinvent the wheel? Like, what can we do next? Like, we've already done this, we've already done that. And hopefully, like, having this content and this outreach stuff available for you to look at that other organizations up and down the coast have done will just inspire you in your own outreach to make creativity a little easier. And then the last part of this goal, right, says magnify local voices. I mean, ultimately, if this tool works the way it was intended, and we hope it does, and I think for now it is doing that, you're gonna have a larger range of people who are observing your content. So, if I put something out in Milwaukee and somebody's using it up in Sheboygan, I mean, that just makes the stuff I created have all that more impact. And we're all here because we have the same goal, and we want to make sure Lake Michigan is clean and healthy, and having your content shared more broadly only helps with that. Okay, and our second goal, which we kind of touched on, Linda touched on very, very briefly, is we want to present a unified message, a unified outreach message up and down the coast of Lake Michigan and Wisconsin. So this graphic that I have here, I put together a while ago to kind of, clarify it visually. And it's ultimately like, if you think of the Lake Michigan stakeholders as this radio tower, right, in the center of the lake, and then those little shapes it's on my left side, I assume on yours as well, but those little shapes that are all different colors, as you go up, you're sharing the same stuff. You're sharing the stuff about pet waste, about rain barrels, about all these things, but the wording's a little different, the branding is different, the aesthetic is different. So ultimately, even though the message is the same, it's just distinct enough where it's not unified. And so the idea is that if all that stuff comes into us at the resource hub, what we can do is we can kind of create from those, like, if everybody sends us their version of a pick up your pet waste tweet, and we compile that on our end and then send it back out, then anybody who's kind of following multiple of these organizations is getting this exact same message. And that, like, makes it almost, I mean, the idea is that it makes it way more potent, right? So like you see on the other image, like the shapes are all unified. So the idea is that in addition to giving this content and having it on the resource hub itself, we're also going to have this content coming out that can be shared in a unified way. And I think, like, you've probably already picked up on this from all of our different mentions of it. But ultimately, part of the big thing is, like, this target audience is pretty specific, and we chose to do that on purpose because ultimately we wanted to make sure that, like, there's a lot of different moving parts that go into this resource hub. And so what we wanted to avoid was having it be like this, just like ultimately like chaotic dump site of all this different stuff. We wanted it to be super strategic in how it was organized, and so that way it was the most effective. And so the target audience is ideally stormwater content, right? Even though there's all sorts of other, like, kind of cool water stuff, we really wanted to focus this on stormwater. And I mean, part of it too, as Deidre mentioned in the survey, is like, these topics aren't particularly they're sometimes difficult to engage people. So to have a resource specific for those topics was important. And then the target audience to use the website is supposed to be outreach professionals. So it's like outreach professionals sharing with other outreach professionals, and then ultimately the general public gets that information, but through their local groups that they're already kind of tuned into. And then the last point on the target audience is it's intended to be, like, specific to, like, Lake Michigan and, like, in that Lake Michigan basin. But ultimately, I mean, that's not like a deal breaker if you have content that's relevant to rain gardens that's not specifically Lake Michigan. It's not ultimately meaning that it's not worth it. But like I said, we really wanted to try to focus in on this specific area. Okay, so now I'm kind of going to go into, like, how this tool is designed to work, right? So the process of collecting materials. If you go to the resource hub and you look, you'll see this graphic. I made this, and that's on the site, so you'll be able to kind of see it again. But the idea is that, like, step one is collecting the information, and that's, like, the most, like, just, like, the deeply essential part, right? This is intended, like, Lake Michigan stakeholders as a whole is intended to be, to amplify and collaborate with, like, all these organizations that are, the voice of Lake Michigan, right? So if we collect materials from the Voice of Lake Michigan, which is you guys, like outreach professionals doing this work already and creating this content already, that's step one. And then step two, the idea is, okay, on our end, on the Lake Michigan stakeholders end, and right now that's me, but I mean, as the organization in general is going to sit there and kind of organize and sort and like, you know, sift through this information and see what, you know, what's relevant, what do we need to fill these gaps, like what do we think is a great thing to share. And then the third step to unify is when we kind of are, so that's kind of getting back to goal 2 that I mentioned, which is like sharing this same message. So we take all these things, you know, some of them will be shared the way that they were sent to us. Others of them will pull certain things. Maybe we pull a picture from this site. Maybe we pull some facts from this site and like an anecdote, and we create this flyer. And then that's going to be what's delivered. And we'll talk about that, but that's going to be through the LMS listserv. And that's ideally going to be another part besides just the content that lives on the resource hub, this like other dynamic part, which is like this content we're creating from your submissions that goes back to you. So just now we're going to get kind of into the nuts and bolts of the website, which is my favorite part. I've learned a lot. So that's, this is our submission form. So you can access the submission form a bunch of different ways. Every single topic page has its own submission form at the bottom. And then if you go to the landing page, which we'll have a screen grab of both of those in a minute, but you'll see there's a button that just says submission form. So if you create something really cool and you're like, oh, I really want to share this on the resource hub, you know, you don't have to like filter through the decision tree on topics to ultimately get to a submission box. You can get to it right away. Or if you're just browsing and then something comes up to you, the submission box is there on every page. So we really wanted to save people time and make it easy to submit. The last thing we wanted was like to deter submissions because it's too complicated. So you can pretty much find it anywhere on the site. It's really easily accessible. And then the other thing too regarding that is materials on any topic can be submitted on any of the boxes. They all go to the same place. So if you see on the submission form, it says topic. And so right now, like what is a watershed is up there because I pulled this from the what is a watershed page. But ultimately, if you were on rain barrels and you had a really great, oh, it just occurred to me, I have this great topic on vehicle fluids. I mean, you can still submit that, just change the topic to vehicle fluids. So all the submission boxes are the same. And then just again, reiterating. So everything on the resource hub, we want you to use it. That's the point, right? So you can download anything that's on there. Content can be used as is. If you need to modify it, you modify it. So the idea is like, if it's on there, you can take it, right? And then the second bullet point is really just referring to like what I mentioned already, which is this LMS listserv and like getting that content that's new and sending it out to your network. And then again, like the last point is just, you know, inspiration. Ultimately, like we're all on the same team. And so the more we can learn from each other, the better all of our individual work will be. Okay, so how is the site organized? So like this is like that map you saw that Deidre showed, that Plectica map is kind of like what we were trying to get at when we were trying to sort out how to organize the site. So ultimately we have, this is on the landing page. So you go to the landing page, you have that graphic, and then you're down here, it says content, and you can either choose by topic or by month. And so by topics, obviously going to take you directly to our topics. By month is going to filter topics as they're relevant to month. And then the idea under there, this more information situation is like, you know, I mean, not everybody who uses the resource hub is going to have sat through me talking about it for 20 minutes, right? So the hope with that is like if somebody's on LMS website and kind of stumbles across this, the more information tabs give you this idea of what it is, and hopefully it can kind of speak for itself. So this is what you're going to get when you click on either by topic or by month. So if you know, I have to give a presentation to a school group about lawn chemicals, which I don't know, school group and lawn chemicals is probably not the best example, but you can ultimately go directly to by topic, click on lawn chemicals, and then you're there. And then by month is like, if you know, okay, I have an outreach program in July, and I'm not really sure what I want to talk about. Let me try to get some ideas. You go to by month, and then you click on July, and then the next slide is going to show you what'll come up. So then ultimately what you get is you get this, which is just the same topics. It's the same content as if you were to go directly to by topic, but it's sorted as to like what's relevant to July and kind of minimize the minimize the thinking you have to do about like sifting through the topics on your own. And so, and then you can access I think it's really nice is you can access the different months. If you, you click on the wrong month, you don't have to go all the way back. You can just, oh, I actually meant to click on June, and just go up from there. So let's say you select rain gardens. So now you're going to be brought to this rain garden content page, and the buttons here are a little different. So I'll talk through that in a second, but you get the rain garden content, and then those buttons down here, these are gonna kind of drag you. So it's like an anchor. So it's gonna pull you down to the part where they're stored, but ultimately all of the content on this page is just on the same page. So if you get here and you're not really sure what you want to pull, but you know you want it to be about rain gardens, you're definitely can just scroll through and see what's there. Or if you go, it'll save the buttons, the anchors are intended to save you time. If you know exactly that you want a how-to guide or a manual, you go boom, click on manuals, it drops you right there. So it's you definitely don't have to use those, but it helps kind of direct you a little bit more intentionally if you're just trying to get one thing and one thing only. Another note about these buttons too, Deidre had mentioned that part of this process was hiring an outreach specialist, which they did do. I wasn't on board then, but those outreach strategies that the specialists kind of like ended up working with LMS to kind of build these outreach strategies are all also on the website too. So you find that under outreach strategies. So if you're going to look at a specific demographic, you can find outreach strategies for that. And then they're the same across the different topics, but they're also like the by month page, they're also relevant to the topic. So if you have rain gardens, the demographics that you're going to see under the outreach strategies are the ones that are relevant to an outreach group on rain gardens. So that also might help you kind of sharpen the intention of your presentation if you're kind of like looking for a little guidance. Okay, and then this is just kind of the last thing. I mean, this is not by any means an exhaustive list, but it's just the kind of stuff that we need from you guys and that you'll hopefully be able to find on the site, which is just, pictures was a big one. Part of this process for me when I started was just kind of talking to people who do community outreach. I had like 10 different interviews with people who are doing stormwater outreach, and I kind of talked to them. And one of the things I asked them is like, what content is most valuable to you? And photographs is the biggest one. So photographs are probably like the hardest to like be discerning about when you find them on the internet. So photos are a big one, but anything, fact sheets, manuals, videos, how-to guides, charts, social media posts, any of that stuff that you use to do your outreach as an organization is what we're going to want on the resource hub, right? Okay, I think that's it. Right, so last and definitely not least, but in fact most important is what can you do? Like how can you engage with this? The big thing is if you work at a water organization, we want you to explore the Coastal Resource Hub. So Kendra is gonna put in the chat for you guys the link, and that's just like a link to the Lake Michigan Stakeholders website, and from there you can find the Coastal Resource Hub and just kind of explore it when you have some time. And then if you want, and I would really encourage you to submit some content and just start kind of contributing and seeing how it goes. Right now, this has been like a 3-year process, and we're at the stage where it's ready to go. We just need to start step 1, which is collecting content. So the more content you're willing to share, the better this resource will be for you and for everyone else. And then the second thing you can do if you are part of a water organization, you can subscribe to the LMS listserv. So you're going to send, and this is another thing that Kendra will throw in the chat for you guys. That is a like email address, and you send a blank email to that address. And it ultimately, I think, needs moderator approval, but that should be fine. So if you want to subscribe to the LMS listserv and you want to start getting that unified messaging content that we're creating, I'd really encourage you to do that. And then if you are not a water organization and you don't work for one, you don't do outreach, but you live in the Lake Michigan basin, you care about the lake, everyone's the voice of Lake Michigan too, right? So these organizations near you are doing this work, and follow them on social media. It would be really great. Retweet their stuff, magnify their work, and I think that is about all I have. So, yep, we're about to move into question and answer. And then another thing too is while we're doing question and answer, if you haven't already, if you could fill out that poll, that gives us some useful and helpful like information just to kind of see who is all here and what kind of places you guys represent. So thank you.
Thanks, Amy. So I'm going to start off with questions and answers and then get into some of these poll questions as well. So again, if you haven't responded to the poll yet, please do that. And then please make sure that you are putting your questions into specifically the Q&A panel rather than the chat. So please go ahead and enter some questions in if there's anything that you're curious about, and you can also upvote those questions as well. So our first question is a really good one, and one that we have actually spent a lot of time considering. So the question is, when an organization submits content, do they retain ownership rights of the content? Does the organization's name stay on the content? That might be a good question for Amy or Jake.
Yeah, I can start that, and then if Jake has something to add, he can. We definitely spent a ton of time, like Kendra said, talking about that. I think we've ultimately come to the conclusion that no, like the whole point of the resource hub is that you're willing to kind of share content more broadly, and you would, like, in theory, lose ownership. With that said, I mean, if there's something that you create that you like really like, and funding was a big issue for that too, right? So if there's something you create that was funded and those logos need to be on there, I mean, there can be special considerations. I think, Jake, do you have anything to add? I think that was just kind of the consensus we ultimately came to. And then maybe we were planning on creating like a page of like, okay, here's people who've contributed. So your logo is on the resource hub, but not on the content specifically.
Yeah, exactly. The long and short of it is to simplify things, and the more brands and logos that exist on content, the more confusing it gets. So, you know, I'm Jake Fincher, Executive Director of Southeastern Wisconsin Watersheds Trust, and we work in Southeast Wisconsin. So if we send out content to our local residents and it has information about, you know, logos and branding of an organization that operates up in Green Bay or Marinette, it's a little confusing, maybe not too distracting, but again, simplifying. So what we're hoping to do is collect as much inspirational content as we can, reformat that information in a way that's really effective, the best of the best materials, all in one spot, no branding, no ownership. But then when a user goes onto the website, downloads this information, you could put your own logo on it and redistribute. So it's doing a lot of the content development for organizations. I hope that makes sense. And that's the solution we've come up with. One thing to point out is this process is most definitely a development process. We are nowhere near finished. In fact, the website has a lot of work that needs to be done, especially around the solicitation and gathering of content. So this isn't fully launched, but we are ready to start receiving input and inspiration from other organizations doing outreach already.
Thank you, Amy and Jake.
Mm-hmm.
We have another good question. What kind of...
Hey, Kendra,
Oh,
can I jump in really quick?
go,
I want to
yes,
just
please.
add, related to that, think about it as a potluck. You know, you might have worked really hard on your tater tot casserole and you brought it to the picnic, but look at all the other amazing food that you get to eat for free.
Yeah. I love it. That's a great explanation.
Great analogy, Linda. So another question that we have here is what kind of web traffic have you been getting so far? This might be a good one for Amy. And as Jake just mentioned, this isn't fully up and running as far as all the information being available, but certainly we have been getting some good responses, good information, and people are continuing to submit information.
Yeah, I can answer that. As far as I know, so as far as the content getting submitted, a lot of it is with like organizations that we worked pretty closely with and have kind of like been involved in this process with us. And like, I've basically been waiting for this to launch. So at this point in the process, I'm kind of reaching out to the people that we have like these pretty well-established relationships with. Hey, you know, do you have some stuff? Can you start sharing some stuff? So we haven't really put out publicly that we're launching. And that's why like this is a pretty like, I think, significant presentation for us, because this is one of the first times we've really been like, hey, like, can you give us, what do you guys think? Can you give us some feedback, give us some content? We'd really appreciate it. So the answer is web traffic right now is pretty targeted to people that I've asked to visit the website, but I'm hoping in the next couple, weeks to couple months, that'll be notably different.
Yeah, and exactly like Amy is saying, this is brand new. We haven't really pushed this out at all. So we'll be doing that hopefully soon. So the more content we get, the more it'll be pushed out, to be honest. And with that, looking at the analytics of the website, we have a really great representation of who's visiting the Lake Michigan Stakeholders website in general, in regards to coastal perspective. So Door County, Marinette, Green Bay, and everywhere down to the very tip of Kenosha. So it seems to be pretty evenly dispersed in terms of who along the coast is using this website.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to get into some of our poll questions. We've got some good responses there. And I encourage you to, if you have any further questions, please continue to drop those in the Q&A. Don't be shy. But moving on to our poll. The first question was, do you live or work in the Lake Michigan Basin? And it looks like based on our responses, everyone here does. So that was something we just wanted to get a good idea of the audience here today, whether we had folks joining us in this. I know it is the Lake Michigan Regional Sub-event, but we just wanted to see if there were any folks that happened to jump on from other areas as well. And I'd just like to let my other presenters know as I'm reviewing these poll questions, if you have any thoughts to share on them in addition, please go ahead and jump in. The next poll question specifically asks, what organization do you represent, if you're interested in sharing? And it looks like we have some representation from Milwaukee Riverkeeper, Sheboygan County Planning on Conservation, Lakeshore Natural Resource Partnership, and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's exciting to see a variety of different organizations and different types of organizations as well. Our next poll question gets into which of the Coastal Resource Hub's topics is most interesting to you. And this is a good one because, again, we really want to make sure that the information that we're putting out there and that we're collecting and making available is information that is relevant and interesting to those who, to make this a valuable resource. So it looks like the top response, so we gave several different options there of the different topics that Amy described that are on the website. The top response is planting trees. So about 20% selected that. I should also mention that participants were able to choose up to 3. So some people may have had multiple answers. But other than that, so the planting trees stands out as the top one. Other than that, it was really pretty equal across the board. Not so much interest in leaves. But all of the other topics, which were what is a watershed, rain gardens, lawn chemicals, ice and snow control, were kind of equally noted. So that is definitely very valuable information. So the next question looks at, how does your organization do community outreach? And this is something that we're interested in knowing because, again, it helps us to better build out this resource and make it more relevant and more applicable to your work. So I appreciate those of you who shared. Oh, we've got some really great responses. So the first response is, as far as how your organization does community outreach, one of our participants today mentioned that they work in water quality management with work in managing and supporting a team of 100+ stream monitor volunteers. We do outreach through our volunteer opportunities and annual cleanups, as well as fundraisers and social media. So I think that's very interesting, you know, managing a really large group of volunteers versus some smaller organizations maybe working with smaller groups or on a one-on-one basis. Another organization or another participant commented their community outreach is directly to area lakes associations and conservation clubs. Another participant answered education and engagement via community-based partner groups. We have another response mainly via partners. Also have a monthly news feed, but general public really isn't the main audience, mostly goes through those partnerships. And then as far as methods of communication, as far as the community outreach, someone mentioned both in-person and virtual communication at this point. And I'd like to ask our presenters, any thoughts on how understanding how the participants do their community outreach? Does that help you to think about how to present the materials that we're organizing and sharing?
Simply. That's the first word that comes to my mind. With the wicked problems that we have with water, they're so complicated and it can get really overwhelming. So keeping it simple and making sure that they're easy to use can cover a broad range of audiences, but also have really quality information in there. So it's very informative and not just, hey, dirty water bad, right? So how can we narrow in but make it really simple? And that's the whole nature of this, the resource hub, I would say.
Thank you, Jake. Absolutely. So we're definitely trying to cast a wide net and make this available to everyone that is, you know, regardless of your organization, who you're trying to reach, and what method. We want to make sure that this information is usable for you. So our next question is, what information would you want to see available on the Coastal Resource Hub? And we have one response. Information for members of the general community who may not have water resource backgrounds or an in-depth understanding of these issues, especially resources that are relevant to and inclusive of people of color and disadvantaged communities. And again, I think, you know, the target is specifically to members of the community who don't have a background in water resources. Jake, any further comments on that one?
Yeah, and I on my end, I am seeing maybe one more response to the residential pollinator and bird habitat best practices. Love it. I think we should most definitely try to add something like that on there as well. And then, you know, ensuring that we are inclusive in representing as many communities as possible is something that's really important as well. So phenomenal feedback that we're definitely going to work into the resource hub.
Another interesting comment I saw on that one. Oh, sorry, Linda. It's okay. I just want to add it just to remind people that if they're listening and they have some of this good material, it's not just a one-way street, right? And I know we've said that all the way through, but our group doesn't have everything for every need, but you might have something that the guy 2 counties down needs. So please do share what you have and what you're willing to share.
Thanks, Linda. That's a great reminder.
Oh, I was just going to add that was kind of the whole point, is that we all have really large areas to cover. We all have like a lot of different kinds of people that we need to reach, and people from different backgrounds and different areas. And really it's just too much, you know, for most organizations to do to ground. So we're hoping that if we all come together, we can just grab information and share it openly. And we all have our own strengths with different audiences or with different material. And that's kind of the idea, is that it would be sort of this collaborative effort not be reinventing the wheel all the time and living in our own silos. So hopefully we would be able to reach all the audiences that we need to reach through this process.
Thanks, Deidre. On that note, there's another comment in this poll question as far as what information would people like to see available on the Coastal Resource Hub, and that includes which groups are working on which projects.
Yeah, I think that again really gets at the nature of what we're hoping to do. So we'll start hopefully with, rolling out education content and information that's developed. And then as this resource hub grows, we could become more specific about, more topics under that education section, but also events about who's doing what. Do you have any resources about how you host that event? Could we modularize and scale that and then have the guide of someone who's already on events? Hey, this is how we do it. We're going to share it with the resource hub so anybody could take this little manual that we put together and do it in their own communities. And that right there, that question, which groups are working on which, and that's the nature of Lake Michigan stakeholders as well, generally, is trying to just learn from one another about who's doing what up and down the coast. So another pitch to get involved. It is a really cool group. I love working with it, and you should definitely check us out.
Yeah, and I want to do a shameless plug for LMS as it relates to Lake Michigan Day. It's a COVID year in a different fashion, but Lake Michigan Day is it's in August, and it's an opportunity for groups up and down the coast to host their own events celebrating the lake. And we'll be putting out some information about what we're going to do this spring in preparation for Lake Michigan Day, and how we're asking folks to recommit themselves to the health of the lake and how to share their love for the lake with us via some short videos. So I think we'll probably have a link on the LMS website very soon, and maybe Jake, I can ask you to put something up on the resource hub as well, just to remind people we'll be doing that. So watch for that.
Fantastic, thank you. So our last poll question is, in your opinion, is anything missing from the Coastal Resource Hub? Our first response is, perhaps we need our own mascot like Sparkles the water dog. And it sounds like Deidre's duck in the background is a hit as well.
That duck is always a hit. I love it. It's my pandemic, it's my COVID duck.
So another response here, as far as anything that folks are feeling is missing, potentially, a couple of items mentioned here include a plastic-free campaign, shoreline erosion, as well as a way to request content from other stakeholders. So those are some good things to think about.
Yeah, those topics are phenomenal, and the shoreline erosion, I think, is critical and something that we'll definitely be adding on as soon as we start to add new content. That is a critical one, especially for us as LMS. And then the idea of requesting content from other stakeholders. Yes, like that is exactly what we want. And if you have ideas on how that could look, shoot Amy or I an email or anybody here, and we can talk about that more. How would that look? What would be the best way to do that? And is it just posting people's information, or is it something else? So we'd be more than happy to hear if you have more thoughts on that.
Thanks, Jake. I'd like to return to our question and answers. We've got another good question here, and we have just about under 5 minutes left here, so our timing is great here. The last question I think is a really great one. In the future, are you planning on a marketing campaign for the Resource Hub?
I feel like I've been answering a lot, so unless anybody wants to take a crack at it, I could. Amy, I think you just unmuted yourself. Go ahead.
I mean, I was gonna say, yeah, I think the answer is yes. Ultimately, I think I kind of made a timeline for this a while ago, and marketing was part of it, and like what that looks like. But I guess maybe Jake knows more specifics, but I think, like, to the point we made earlier, it's still pretty early in the process, and I think we need to make sure before we market it that we've got it where we want it. But I think ultimately that's the goal, right? The more people who see it, the better.
And seeing that follow-up question there, so it says, sorry, rewording a bit, interested in how you plan on marketing. And so this brings up a really great point. And so we will be pushing out the Resource Hub itself and not developing a marketing or outreach campaign ourselves for LMS, but more, hey, this Resource Hub is up and running. We need contributors, we need information, and then we can work on it and then send it back out. And so how we will be doing that, how we will be branding, not branding, but how we will be marketing the Resource Hub is through LMS and leveraging the network of organizations within LMS and requesting each partner organization to leverage their own individual partner network. So it can kind of spider web out from there. So we plan on creating a guide about how to do that. And so it'll be packaged up really nice and tight, so it's easy to understand. Here's what the Resource Hub is. Here's what we're requesting. Here's how you access. Here's how to contribute.
Yeah, and I would just add that, since we are kind of in the beginning stages, really right now, we're just trying to get buy-in from people. We're trying to get feedback from different organizations about what would work for them, what doesn't work, is the site intuitive, is it something that they would find useful? Because if we don't get the buy-in that we need from organizations, then it won't work. I mean, the whole point is that we can get information from people and then it will be useful, across the board. So it's good that we have Amy and we're spending a lot of time, doing these kind of one-on-one meetings, like really getting feedback from people and figuring out what works and what doesn't. And then we're hoping that when people really latch onto it and they're excited about it, that they'll want to share it with their networks as well. So fingers crossed.
And to that end, Deidre, like if you guys are watching and you do want to talk more about it, like feel free to email me. And I'd be happy to sit down and go over anything in more detail, because like Deidre said, we're really trying to just get buy-in, and that happens a lot of times one-on-one.
And I think that's a great note to end on. Definitely, please do get in touch. Let us know what you think and share content, share information, questions, and concerns with us. Please stay in touch. I'd like to thank all of our presenters for their time and expertise, and a huge thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us as well. We hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. Stick around for the next session to hear keynote speaker Tia Nelson's inspirational story of hope, sharing the ways that conservation and addressing climate change can bridge the divides in our communities, our country, and the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I stopped it.